So here we have an introduction to the quadratic formula. To solve a quadratic equation of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, we may always use the quadratic formula. In the quadratic formula, it looks really crazy, but it's just a matter of plug and chug. Okay, just straightforward substitution. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And again, that looks really confusing, but remember, when you have a quadratic equation, you're looking for this form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So in part A, it has x squared minus 6x plus 5. Well, that is in ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 form. The more of these you do, the easier it'll be to spot that. Again, it could look kind of crazy and overwhelming at first, but we have our quadratic equation in the ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 form. So if we identify the a, b, and c values, the a value is essentially the coefficient of the x squared. Well, if there's nothing there, it's assumed it's a 1. So after the sign, I'm going to write a equals 1. B is the coefficient of x, which is negative 6. Make sure you watch your signs. And then the c value is the number all by itself, which is positive 5. So c equals 5. So once you have it in the correct form, and then identify your a, b, and c values, it's just a matter of substituting those values into this ugly formula. So the first one is to show the substitution. So x equals negative b. So we have a negative 6. So that's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is negative 6 squared, minus 4ac. So 4 times 1 times 5. And that's all divided by 2a, which is 2 times 1. Now, the more of these you do, the easier that substitution gets. You just have to watch your signs on it. That's something people will miss a lot. So the negative b, so negative 6. In the next step, that'll turn into a positive 6. And then plus or minus the square root. Now, this is my preference. So me as your teacher, I do not care what negative 6 squared is. I don't care what 4 times 1, 4 times 1 times 5, I don't care what that is. What I care about is what's inside the square root. So if you do negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5 all at once, you can just do it all at once in your head, or if you can, or in your calculator. Now I would say in your head, that's positive 36, and then minus 20 will give you a 16. Now, if you can't do that, then in your calculator, do negative 6 squared. Make sure you put it in parentheses. So negative 6 squared, and then minus 4 times 1 times 5. Put it all in at once without the square root, and you get 16. Okay, so that's what I got here by doing it in my head. Okay, and then that is all divided by 2. Now the next step is to look at if we can simplify it any more. Now there is a reason that I don't want to see what the square root of 16 is right in that first step. So you have to have this step right here. Okay, make sure you have that step. You don't always get a nice square root there. That's why I don't want you to just go to 4 and then in this step. So we look at 6 plus or minus the square root of 16. Well, the square root of 16, we know that is 4. And if you don't know that, then just do second square root, second answer, and it gives you 4. or just do square root of 16. Okay, and then that is divided by 2. Okay, so make sure you keep on carrying down that 2. A lot of times students will make a mistake and they'll forget about the 2 in the denominator, and then it'll magically show up at the end. Make sure you carry it down through each step. So now we have 2 different answers here. One of them comes from 6 plus 4 divided by 2, and the other is 6 minus 4 divided by 2. Once you get good at these, you don't have to show this step, but for right now, I'm going to show that step, showing those 2 different equations. And then to solve it, 6 plus 4 is 10 divided by 2 will give you 5. Now you have to be careful in your calculator. And so let me get you the second answer here. 6 minus 4 will be 2 divided by 2 is positive 1. In your calculator, you have to be careful because what I'll see a lot of students do, they'll say 6 plus 4 divided by 2, and they'll do it like this. 6 plus 4 divided by 2. They'll put it all in at once, and that gives them 8. Well, the correct answer is 5. What your calculator is doing is order of operations. It's just doing 4 divided by 2, which is 2, and then taking 6 plus that answer. But remember that 6 plus 4 is all together in the numerator. So if you put it all in at once, put parentheses around the numerator, and then divide by the denominator of 2, and that'll give you the correct answer. So that's something that a lot of people miss. Now I just want to point out here that that quadratic, rather than using this quadratic formula, you could have also factored it. Doesn't negative 5 times negative 1 equal positive 5 and add to negative 6? So that gives you 5 and 1 for answers. So remember the factored form, x minus 5 times x minus 1 would give you those 2 answers. I'm just showing you the quadratic formula to show you that you can use that formula to solve any quadratic equation, even if it factors. Not all quadratic equations will factor. Okay, so moving along to part B, for the sake of time in the video, I want you to try it. Identify the A, B, and C. Notice we have the correct form equal to 0, so we have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So A is 1, B is positive 6, and C is negative 40. So pause the video and try to finish that one, and then we'll go on to the next few. Okay, so here's the solution for part B. You end up getting 4 and negative 10. And if you were to factor that original quadratic, doesn't positive 10 times negative 4 give you negative 40? And then add to positive 6? So that would have factored to x minus 4 times x plus 10. Okay, notice we'll get the same answers, 4 and negative 10. Okay, now the last two are a little bit different because they don't have it equal to 0 yet. So you have to get it equal to 0. If your quadratic does not equal 0 on one side, you have to get it that way, so it's in the proper form. So in the first one, in part C, we'll subtract 4 from each side. And that'll give you x squared minus 7x plus 12. Okay, so go through and solve that one. And in part D, we have 6x squared on one side and then 10 minus 7x on the other. So I would suggest keeping the x squared term positive. So subtract 10 and add 7x. So you add 7x, subtract 10, and then zeros on the right side. Okay, so those are the two equations that you want to solve there. Okay, so if you go through and solve those using the quadratic formula, you'll, just to warn you, part D doesn't work out quite as nicely. So I'll show you the answers. Okay, so notice part D, one of your answers is a fraction. Now you can also reduce that to 5/6, so 5/6 for that answer. Okay, so that's an introduction to the quadratic formula. And what I'll point out now is that notice that each of these answers, as you work through, the square root part ended up being a nice answer. So the square root of 289 is 17. The square root of 1 is 1. The square root of 196 is 14. The square root of 16 is 4. Now, the next thing we'll look at in the next video is what if that doesn't happen. But right now, luckily it did, so we get these nice answers for our solutions.